The sound of rain fell as if the sky itself were weeping for an ancient sin. Inside a silent mansion, surrounded by high walls and even higher secrets, lived a woman who had sworn never to believe in love again. Alessia Moretti, the Mafia boss that Christmas forgot. She didn't light up her home, didn't open her doors to anyone. But on that cold Christmas Eve, fate came knocking, carrying a name she had spent 10 years trying to forget. And when the past arrives disguised as a gift, not even the coldest heart can escape the warmth of redemption. Some call it a miracle, others forgiveness. But for Alessia Moretti, it was simply the Christmas she had sworn never to live again. The city glowed like a profane altar, yet the Moretti mansion stood in silence, wrapped in shadows. Outside, lights flickered as if celebrating a miracle she no longer believed in. Alessia stared at her reflection in the glass, and the woman she saw on the other side looked carved from stone. No cracks, no soul, no time. Outside, Naples pulsed with color and hope. Inside, ruled the cold of someone who learned to win by losing her heart along the way. The servants moved quietly, like muffled notes from an old piano. The unlit fireplace stood like an open grave, a reminder of the warmth she had buried long ago. The clock ticked with the cruel precision of someone witnessing a punishment on repeat. "Holidays are for those who still believe in miracles," she muttered, her husky voice scratching the air. The words hung there, like snow that never touches the ground, too light to fall, too heavy to disappear. Alessia turned away from the window and crossed the hall, her steps echoing across the cold marble floor. Her boot struck firmly like someone in control, but her eyes betrayed the weight of someone once conquered by pain. The old portraits on the walls watched her, allies, enemies, ghosts that never left. Power wears many faces, she thought, but they all learn the same truth. Commanding is easy, surviving is another story. In the mirror, her reflection showed a queen without a crown, only iron and guilt. In every corner, a secret. Behind every door, a trace of silence. The mansion was her kingdom and her prison, her fortress and her punishment. The scent of polished wood mixed with the memory of gunpowder, wine and tears held back. She stopped before the bookshelf and ran her fingers over the spines, as if touching old wounds. Among titles of war and contracts of power, the woman who hated Christmas still tried not to hate herself. The phone buzzed on the table, but she didn't answer. Invitations, messages, alliances, all of it felt distant, pointless. Power, she thought, is also knowing when to remain silent. And silence was something she mastered. The world outside was celebrating, while inside her, time only counted the seconds of a winter that never ended. Sometimes silence is the only sound left when love becomes impossible. The rain grew heavier outside, as if the sky were crying for her. The thick curtains kept any trace of Christmas light from entering. No wreaths, no candles, no memories. Christmas is a date for those who've forgotten what the world really is, she thought, before finishing another glass of wine. The bitter taste blended with the familiar burn of guilt, and guilt, for a long time, had been her only toast. On the table, a small picture frame lay face down. She ran her hand over it, but didn't turn it over. She already knew what was there. Eyes that no longer existed, promises buried by time. Love and redemption. Words far too beautiful for someone who gives orders to kill. And yet, a small part of her, hidden among the ruins of pride, longed to hear someone say her name without fear. But the wind shook the windows, and every gust felt like a warning. The clock ticked through long hours, etched into the body of someone who has waited too long. The sound of rain echoed like a refrain of memories, and the past whispered softly, asking to be let in. But she didn't yield. Not now. Not anymore. Love, when it returns, usually charges too high a price for those who learned to survive alone. In the office, papers and guns rested side by side, the new liturgy of power. Each document represented a choice that had cost her a piece of herself. That's how one lived on the throne of iron and blood she had built, Rules sustain empires, she thought. But no rule sustains a weary heart. Outside, the electronic gate blinked red against the fog. Beyond it, the city slept while the rain drew on the pavement the map of a night that seemed to promise something. Alessia sat down, exhausted. Her head tilted for a moment, and a fleeting thought crossed her mind. Perhaps fate, too, gets tired of waiting. Then she heard it. A faint sound, almost human, cutting through the storm. It wasn't the rehearsed tone of the doorbell, but something more raw, insistent, imperfect. The guards exchanged looks through the cameras, alert. Before they could speak, Alessia raised her hand. "Let him in." The words struck like lightning through protocol. The men hesitated but obeyed. And when the door opened, the cold night came in, along with a stranger. The man was soaked, his coat heavy, his eyes weary. In his hands he carried a small golden box, and a name that would make time stand still. In that moment, the Christmas she despised found a new way to haunt her. Snow fell as if the sky had grown tired of pretending joy. Each flake seemed to land with the weight of a memory, covering the Moretti mansion's garden with a white shroud of irony. On the other side of the gate, a motionless figure stood waiting, drenched, defying the storm. Alessia watched from the monitor, cold eyes, controlled breath. It wasn't fear, it was the recognition of a sign repeating itself. The man was bent from the cold, his hands trembling, his gaze steady. None of the guards recognized him, but there was something in the way he waited, not demanding, not pleading, that made time hesitate. "Should we get rid of him?" one of the men asked. Alessia took a few seconds before replying, "No, let him in." The words slipped out like a confession that pride hadn't had time to stop. The gate opened with a metallic groan that tore through the night. The stranger stepped forward, each movement balanced between fear and hope. When the main door opened, the warmth of the house wrapped around him like a distant memory. He looked up and saw her. Alessia Moretti, the name that made criminals kneel and politicians fall silent. The woman who hated Christmas, now standing before him, as real as the storm that had brought him there. "Your name?" she asked, her voice sharp, like a blade hidden in velvet. "Enzo Ricci," he answered. The sound of that last name shattered the air into 1,000 invisible pieces. Alessia blinked slowly, the way someone does when facing a ghost. Rixi. A name time had tried to erase, yet it still pulsed beneath the ruins of her past. "What are you doing here?" she asked. He lifted a small golden box. "This was left for you, many years ago." His words seemed to echo from a place where time hadn't yet passed. Alessia didn't move. She just watched. The box caught the candlelight, glimmering as if it held the glow of an ancient secret. "It was my father who kept it," Enzo continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I found it among his things, before he died." Her breathing slowed, controlled, but inside her, something began to quake. Silent, inevitable. She looked him over from head to toe. The worn coat, the snow-covered boots, the tired but honest eyes. There was no lie in his movements, and that unsettled her. Lies she could handle. But truth, naked and unguarded, was far more dangerous. "Why now?" she asked. "Because promises should be kept, even after death." Silence settled in the room, heavy and complete. And somewhere within it, Alessia heard something she hadn't in 10 years, the sound of her own uncertainty. The guards exchanged looks, waiting for orders. She said nothing. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the storm. It was as if the sky itself was trying to erase the city under the weight of snow. "Let him in," she repeated. The inner doors opened, and a gust of icy wind swept down the hall. Enzo stepped forward carefully, walking as though entering a sacred, forbidden place. The mansion, once a tomb of silence, seemed to breathe again. The echo of his footsteps filled the corridor, each one a cruel reminder that destiny has a dark sense of humor. He stopped in front of her, not daring to sit. "You can leave the box on the table," Alessia said, her tone unreadable. Enzo obeyed, placing the small golden object at the center of the room, between them, like both a boundary and a promise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the faint sound of the fire trying to come alive in the fireplace. Alessia looked at the box but didn't touch it. Her heart, which had played dead for years, beat just to defy her. Enzo kept his eyes lowered, respectful. "May I ask you something?" he ventured. "No," she replied too quickly. But her tone wasn't filled with anger. It was fear. Outside, the rain turned to thick snow. The gate closed automatically, and the world seemed to fade away. Only two strangers remained, trapped between memory and fate. "Richie," she whispered. "That name should not exist within these walls." He nodded slowly. "I know. And in that, I know there was something more. A pain that didn't belong to him alone." She took a step closer, just enough for her perfume, cold, sharp, and unforgettable to reach him. "Who was your father?" she asked, though deep down she already knew. "Marco Ricci," he said. The name hit her like a bullet that didn't kill but tore open old wounds. Marco, the man who betrayed her empire and delivered to death the only man she ever loved. Alessia turned away, her voice low, bitter. "So that's it. Even Christmas decided to punish me." Enzo didn't respond. His eyes held no defiance, only remorse, a quiet apology she hadn't asked for. "I just came to deliver what's yours," he said softly. And the words lingered between them, as heavy and fragile as the snow falling outside. She approached the table, her gaze locked on the small golden box. The edges were worn, dulled by time and touch. "Do you know what's inside?" she asked. "No," he replied. "But I think it belongs more to your heart than to your hands." A faint laugh slipped from her lips, bitter, almost like a sob trying to hide. The fire cracked in the silence, and the mansion seemed to breathe with unease. "Christmas is just a pretty mask for loneliness," Alessia murmured, eyes fixed on him. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But sometimes the mask is the only thing that keeps loneliness from killing us." She turned away, frustrated by his calmness, by the way he faced her pain without fear. She wasn't used to kindness, especially when it came from someone who should be her enemy. For a moment, she considered sending him away, but the storm had already sealed every road. With a tired sigh, she gave in. "The main gate is locked. You can stay until morning." Enzo nodded once. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she replied. "Just don't touch anything." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Not even what hurts?" She didn't answer. She just walked away, her silence sharper than any warning. His footsteps echoed behind her, following like a ghost, unsure of where it belonged. And for the first time in 10 years, Alessia Moretti felt that something, or someone, had stepped into her iron fortress without asking permission. The night, long and endless, had only just begun. His name still echoed through the mansion's halls like a forbidden whisper. Richie. It sounded like glass breaking inside her chest. She moved down the corridor, her stare distant, her steps swallowed by the marble floor. The wind slipped through the windows, making the curtains sway like mourning veils. Every part of her fought for control, but the past, that old merciless enemy, had returned uninvited. In the dim light, her reflection in the mirror looked ghostly pale. For a fleeting second, she saw another face behind her own, Angelo. The memory struck hard, alive and merciless. He was smiling, just as he had 10 years ago, on that night when he promised to return with his heart untouched. But he never came back. Only his body did. And silence. Since then, Christmas had become nothing but a bright epitaph glowing in other people's windows. Leaning against the wall, she tried to breathe. Ricci, she whispered, and the sound of the name seemed to poison the air. Marco Ricci, the traitor who sold Angelo's location for a handful of power. And now his son stood beneath her roof, carrying a gift as if fate itself had come to mock her. No, she thought, her jaw tightening. This can't be a coincidence, because coincidences are just the lies the universe tells to disguise punishment. From the hall, she could hear his footsteps, slow, careful, far too respectful, the kind of respect that unsettles. She poured herself a glass of wine and watched him through the reflection in the glass. Enzo moved like a man afraid to wake the dead, his eyes tracing the paintings, the silence, the heavy soul of the house. There was something about him, a calm that cut deep, a serenity that didn't belong to the name Ricci, and that, more than any threat, made her uneasy. When she returned to the room, he was standing before the table, staring at the golden box but not daring to touch it. "What do you want from me?" Alicia asked, her voice steady and sharp. He turned, startled, yet didn't step back. "Just to give you what's yours." She let out a brief, humorless laugh. "No one gives anything for free in this city. Especially a Ricci." The name left her mouth soaked in poison and memory. Enzo drew a slow breath. "I'm not my father, but you carry his name, and you carry yours." His tone was calm but precise, like a blade sheathed yet ready. The silence that followed was heavy, pulsing. Alessia stepped closer, her gaze fixed on him, cold, assessing, curious. "Do you know what your father did to me?" she asked. "I know he hurt a lot of people," Enzo replied, "but I came here because he tried to fix it, and failed." The air thickened, vibrating under the weight of what was unsaid. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing restless shadows across their faces. Alessia studied him with the precision of someone used to finding lies in other people's eyes. "So you came to finish what he started?" she asked, her tone flat. "No," Enzo said, meeting her gaze. "I came to close what he opened." The words were simple, but they carried that kind of truth that hurts more than any threat. Alessia approached the table, her perfume blending with the scent of wine, fire, and rain. "That box, why now?" she asked. "Because time was waiting for someone brave enough to deliver it. And why should I believe you? Because if I wanted to lie, I'd have chosen another day, not Christmas." He smiled, and that small gesture cracked something inside her, a barely visible fracture in the iron walls she had built around her heart. For a moment, even the sound of the rain seemed to fade. There were only the two of them, and the box between them, like a reliquary of sins long buried. Alessia looked at it, then back at him. "Are you going to tell me what's inside?" she asked. "I can't," he said. "Only you can find out." The way he said you felt personal, almost intimate, as if he already knew her beyond what the world saw. She turned away, needing distance, and walked to the window. The glass was cold, her reflection faint. "Do you even know who I am?" she asked. "Yes," he answered quietly. "But I think what matters more is who you were, before you forgot." The words hit her in a way she didn't expect. There was challenge in them, but also compassion. Two things she had trained herself never to feel. And in the silence that followed, the past began to breathe again. Memories of Angelo, his laugh, the smoke of his cigarette, the taste of wine shared under fading promises, rose like ghosts that still knew their way home. "Angelo died because of your family name," she said, her voice low, eyes still fixed on the storm outside. "And yet, you walked into my house." Enzo's reply was almost a whisper. "Maybe because I needed to understand what his name really meant to you." She turned slowly, her eyes caught between anger and memory. "It meant everything," she said, and for a fleeting second. Her face wasn't that of a mafia boss. It was that of a woman still waiting for someone who would never return. The silent confession lingered between them like smoke in the air. Enzo lowered his gaze, his voice breaking slightly. Then I understand now why my father couldn't deliver this while he was alive. Outside, the wind howled and the windows rattled. The mansion seemed to breathe in sync with the fear and guilt swelling inside its walls. Alessia studied him in silence, trying to decide if this man was merely a messenger, or the punishment fate had chosen for her. And as the storm grew stronger, the golden box remained untouched, a small imprisoned sun, waiting for the right moment to pierce the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, the church bell tolled. 12 chimes. Midnight. Time had closed a circle, and she could feel something inside her about to open. Something that had been locked away for 10 long years. She took a deep breath, her chest heavy. "You can sleep in one of the rooms downstairs," she said, her voice slipping back into its familiar coldness. "Tomorrow, when the snow stops, you leave." Enzo nodded. "As you wish." But before turning away, he looked at her with quiet resolve. Some gifts only make sense when the heart is ready to receive them. Alessia held his gaze but didn't answer. The sound of the door closing echoed through the mansion like the end of a prayer. And in the silence that followed, she knew there was no turning back. Because the name she had tried to forget had just knocked on her door, and fate, relentless as ever, had taken a seat at her table. The golden box still sat on the table like a heart refusing to beat. Alessia watched it from a distance, arms crossed, her expression carved in stone. Yet her eyes betrayed her, curiosity flickering where only indifference should live. The fire cast golden reflections across the aged metal, the light pulsing in rhythm with the slow whisper of rain outside. It was as if time itself was holding its breath. Across the room, Enzo stayed quiet. His clothes were still damp, clinging to him, his hands trembling slightly from the cold. He looked around with a kind of reverent caution, realizing this wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. Every shadow, every corner seemed to watch him. "Are you going to open it?" he asked softly, not daring to move closer. Alessia didn't answer. The silence between them felt like a kind of war. She walked to the window, watching the garden now buried under snow. The storm had thickened, turning the world outside into a white desert. From the hallway, one of the guards spoke up. "The main gate's blocked. No one leaves until morning." She gave a faint nod without turning around. Fate, she thought, had a cruel sense of humor. She didn't like guests, and she liked surprises even less. "Prepare a room on the ground floor," she ordered. Enzo started to thank her, but she cut him off. "Don't. It's only until morning." Her voice was cold, distant, but something in it had changed. A trace of weariness, a small crack where her armor let through something human. He noticed, but said nothing. When the guards left, only the two of them remained, with the soft crackle of the fire breaking the silence. The tension in the room mingled with the scent of burning wood. Enzo glanced discreetly at the golden box resting on the table. "May I ask why you haven't opened it?" he said, his tone respectful, almost gentle. Alessia turned to him, her gaze sharp as glass. "Because what's locked usually has a reason to stay that way," he smiled faintly. "Or maybe it's fear that keeps the lock in place." His words cut through the distance between them like a well-aimed shot. Alessia turned away, annoyed. She reached for the wine and poured herself another glass without saying a word. The way she held the glass, steady but tense, betrayed how much control had become her only defense. "Don't get used to my hospitality, Mr. Ricci," she said with a half-smile that carried both irony and warning. "I never get used to miracles," he replied. For a brief second she almost smiled, but stopped herself. The wine burned down her throat like a memory she'd rather forget. "Christmas is just a pretty disguise for loneliness," she said at last, breaking the silence. Enzo leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Maybe. But sometimes disguises are what save us." "Save?" she repeated, her laugh dry, brittle. "No one gets saved. We just trade one wound for another." He looked at her with a kind of respect that couldn't be bought. "So you believe love is a wound?" She set the glass down with restrained force. "Love is an expensive mistake. one that costs more than hate ever could. The fire flickered, and the light danced across her face, revealing old shadows. For a moment, she looked like a queen exiled within her own throne. The wind outside howled, pressing against the windows as if trying to enter. Enzo glanced toward the storm, then back at her. "You're not afraid of the weather?" he asked. "Storms pass," she said quietly. "It's what they leave behind that stays." The words carried weight, the kind that only comes from experience. And he realized then that beneath her steel exterior lived someone exhausted from being strong for too long. The lights flickered, then died completely. Darkness fell like a heavy curtain. Alessia exhaled softly, resigned. "Generators out?" she asked, but no one answered. She walked to the shelf and lit a candle. Its timid glow sliced through the dark, softening her face in the flame's golden light. For the first time she looked human. Enzo watched her silently. The woman feared across Naples now held a candle as if holding her own past. The flame reflected in her eyes, and for a heartbeat she seemed lost inside her memories. "Who taught you to hate Christmas?" he asked quietly. She looked at him for a long moment. "Christmas took everything from me." Her tone was calm, but the confession cut deep, raw. The sound of the storm filled the silence that followed. Alessia moved back to the table, placing the candle beside the golden box. The firelight made the metal shimmer, and a shiver ran down her spine. "This box. It feels alive," she murmured, almost to herself. Enzo watched her, his expression steady, almost reverent. "Maybe that's because what it carries isn't dead yet." She lifted her gaze, and for a brief second, their eyes met. Time seemed to slow, stretching between them like a fragile thread. There was no power in that moment, no fear, only something ancient, a silent recognition, as if their souls had known each other long before their minds could understand. "Don't get used to my eyes, Richie," she said, breaking the moment. "Danger begins the moment you grow comfortable with what you should fear." He stood slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not every danger is a trap. Some just reveal what you're hiding." Her face stayed composed, but her heart betrayed her. A subtle quickening, the body recognizing a threat the mind refused to name. The fire crackled in the hearth, and for the first time in years, she felt closer to the warmth than the cold. The night crept forward, and the mansion drowned in soft shadows. Alessia walked to the window and watched the snow fall over the sleeping city. Outside, everything was still. Inside, something had awakened. The pull of the box, the strange calm of that man, the rhythm of the storm, it all felt orchestrated by a force she couldn't define. When her eyes returned to the golden box, she knew it wasn't time yet. Some secrets, if opened too soon, take revenge. And deep down, Alessia, the woman who hated Christmas, began to understand that the gift she feared most wasn't inside that box, but sitting across from her. The mansion had lost all power, sinking into a near-sacred twilight. The wind moaned outside, and the windows trembled as if the world itself were reminding her it still existed beyond those walls. Alessia moved through the corridors in silence, the candle trembling in her hand, casting long, restless shadows. Even her footsteps sounded too loud, each creak of the floor whispering memories she'd tried to bury. The storm had turned time into a prison. No car could leave, no gate could open. And for the first time in years, she found herself trapped with someone, not by choice but by fate. Enzo sat near the fireplace, patient and composed, coaxing the fire back to life. The flames rose shyly, uncertain, as if afraid of the place they burned. From across the room, Alessia watched him. There was something disarming in the way he tended to the fire, calm, patient, almost reverent. The men she knew always tried to control the flames. He simply invited them to exist. A small gesture, yet it revealed more than words ever could. She approached slowly, the sound of her boots echoing softly, in sync with her heart pretending to be still. As the fire grew steady, the room came alive again. Candlelight and flame danced together, painting the walls with moving shadows. Enzo looked up, and for a fleeting instant, the reflection of the fire caught in her eyes. There was no arrogance, no defiance between them, only something quiet, something that felt almost familiar. "Thank you for the fire," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's all we need to make it through the night." She sat in the armchair opposite him, keeping a careful distance. "Don't get used to this," she warned. "To what?" he asked. "To the silence. It often feels like peace, but it's only a pause between two wars." He nodded, eyes fixed on the fire. "Maybe. But sometimes it's in the pause that we find the strength to keep fighting." His words lingered in the air, soft, but dangerously true. The crackling of the fire was the only sound filling the room. Alessia glanced around. The stone walls, the heavy furniture, the high ceiling. Everything was too big, too heavy, too empty. A fortress built to endure, not to welcome. "Do you know what power does to people, Richie?" she asked. "It steals the sound from a house, the laughter, the music, the love. All that's left is the echo." Enzo watched her quietly, the way someone listens to a confession not meant to be spoken aloud. "And what makes someone keep going?" he asked. She took a slow breath, her eyes lost in the flames. "Habit. Even pain becomes an addiction." He leaned forward slightly, letting the firelight touch his face. "Then maybe it's time to detox." She turned her head away, unsettled by the tenderness hidden beneath his courage. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and the candle on the table flickered, threatening to die. Alessia stood up and shielded the flame with her hand, her face just inches from the light. The flickering glow danced in her eyes, and Enzo, without meaning to, couldn't look away. There was something magnetic about that moment, a woman made of iron trying to protect a fragile spark. "You don't have to look at me like that," she said, not turning around. "I'm just not used to seeing someone save what can be so easily released," he replied. She smiled faintly, but it wasn't warmth. It was armor. "You talk too much for a guest, and you feel too much for someone who claims not to feel anything." The silence that followed was heavy, intimate, the kind that doesn't ask permission. It simply settles in. Alessia sat again, her eyes on the fire. "You're persistent, Richie. Or maybe I just see what others are too afraid to look at." Outside, the snow kept falling unhurriedly. The sound of it against the windows was soft, almost celestial. Alessia rose once more and walked to the window. Beyond the glass, the world was white, still, distant. "There was something cruel in so much beauty," she murmured. "Everything looks pure, but underneath, it's frozen." Enzo approached slowly, respecting the fragile space between them. "Maybe people are like that too." She glanced at him sideways. "Are you calling me cold, Mr. Ricky?" "I'm saying that sometimes ice is just a way of hiding what's still alive underneath." The answer caught them both off guard. The air seemed to shift. Alessia looked away first, and he realized he'd touched a place he shouldn't have. The candle finally went out, leaving only the firelight. Alessia leaned back, watching the flames move in restless patterns. "Do you believe in destiny?" she asked, her voice lower now. "I believe in meetings that seem like mistakes but aren't. And if they're punishments, then maybe punishment is where the heart finds redemption." She said nothing. His words echoed softly, and something inside her began to melt, quietly, unwillingly. The firelight shimmered in her pupils as if the past itself were asking for forgiveness. "You speak like a man who's lost a lot," she said at last. "Maybe because that's what taught me to listen." Alessia turned her face away, hiding how much his words had struck her. "Listening is dangerous," she whispered. "It's the first step toward caring." Outside, the wind had softened, and the rain had turned into a slow, rhythmic dripping. The storm seemed to rest, as if the sky itself were waiting for something to happen within those walls. Enzo rose from his chair and picked up the extinguished candle. May I light it again? He asked. Alessia said nothing for a moment, then gave a small nod. He lit it from the fire, and the glow returned, spreading warmth through the room. See? He said, placing the candle back on the table. Not every darkness is the end. Sometimes it's just a pause. She looked from the fire to him. You sound like a man who still believes in miracles, and you sound like a woman who's afraid of them. For a moment. She wanted to reply, but the words didn't come. Her tired eyes softened. Good night, Richie, she murmured. He nodded gently, but remained where he was, watching the flames. Alessia climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing like an old sigh. At the top, she turned back. He was still there, the firelight flickering around him. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel so empty. And the silence, not so cruel. But as she closed the door to her room, something deep inside whispered what she refused to hear. Christmas hadn't finished with her yet. The night slipped into a strange stillness. The wind no longer howled. It only murmured softly through the cracks of the windows. The mansion was wrapped in an unnatural kind of peace, the kind that feels like being watched by the world itself. Drawn by the faint crackle of burning wood, Alessia descended the stairs again. The firelight danced across the walls, painting moving shadows that breathed like ghosts. Enzo was asleep by the hearth, his body leaned against the sofa, the weight of exhaustion pulling him into peace. His coat lay on the floor, his breathing steady and calm. Alessia stopped at the doorway, her eyes fixed on him. There was something almost poetic about his vulnerability. A man sleeping in the house of a woman who could kill him, trusting that she wouldn't. The sight unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She stepped closer, her heels silent against the carpet. The flames flickered in her eyes, softening her face, stealing away the ice. For an instant, the past blurred into the present. She saw Angelo, his smile in the firelight, his voice whispering that she still had a heart, even when she denied it. And now, looking at another man, the memory felt too alive to be coincidence. Alessia knelt slowly beside him, her gaze tracing his features. His face was marked, strong, worn by time, but there was a calmness there, the kind of peace found only by those who fought too many battles and no longer need to win. A strand of her hair slipped over her shoulder, and she brushed it away absent-mindedly, a small human gesture that revealed more of her than any confession ever could. The fire crackled, and Enzo stirred slightly, his eyes opening to find hers already on him. For a moment, neither spoke. No sound, no movement, only the warmth of the fire and the faint rhythm of the dying storm outside. It's not very wise to fall asleep in the house of someone like me, she said finally, breaking the silence with a tone that tried to sound cold, but came out softer than she intended. Enzo sat up slowly, his gaze steady, locked with hers. Maybe I trust too easily. Or maybe I see what you're trying to hide. Alessia raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. He smiled then, small, genuine, almost shy, and the gesture disarmed her. It was a smile she hadn't seen in years, the kind that doesn't demand or deceive. And suddenly, the space between them felt far too small for everything that hung in the air. She stood, reclaiming her distance. Don't let your heart mistake curiosity for courage, Richie, and don't mistake fear for wisdom, he replied. She turned away, but his gaze followed. There was something in the way he looked at her, not as the Mafia boss, but as a woman, and that was something she had long forgotten how to be. The fire painted the room in gold and amber tones, the warmth making the air almost intimate. Alessia moved to the window, hoping to escape the moment, but the glass betrayed her, reflecting them both side by side, divided only by doubt. Why didn't you go to sleep? She asked. Because something tells me this isn't a night meant for sleeping. She exhaled slowly, her heart, once steady and cold, beginning to race. The silence between them stretched, charged with something unspoken. Enzo stood and approached, each step deliberate. You don't have to be afraid of me, he said quietly. I'm not afraid of anyone. Then why do your eyes say otherwise? The question lingered, glowing like a spark that refused to fade. Alessia looked away, but he was already close enough for the warmth of the fire to blur the air between them. "You don't know what you're doing," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. "Maybe I know more than you think." He took another step forward. Now the distance between them was no more than a breath. Alessia crossed her arms, her gaze wavering despite herself. "Don't play with fire, Richie." He smiled faintly. "Fire doesn't scare me. It keeps me warm." For a heartbeat, time froze. The sound of the fire, the faint scent of wine in the air, the rhythm of their breathing. It was as if the universe had paused, waiting to see who would give in first. Alessia drew in a slow breath, gathering the remnants of her control. "You shouldn't be here, but I am." She turned then, finally meeting his eyes. Hers, once cold and guarded, now flickered like the flames, a battlefield between restraint and desire. "You're bold. Or maybe just tired of running from what I feel." The words struck her like a quiet storm. She stepped back, but he didn't follow, just watched, patient. As if he understood that her greatest battle was the one happening inside her. The firelight danced against her skin, tracing her features in a soft glow that made her look almost unreal. "I don't know if it's courage or madness that brought you here," she said. "Maybe a little of both." She looked away and let out a small, reluctant smile, the kind that escapes before pride can stop it. "I don't usually let strangers get comfortable." "Then maybe," he said softly. "I'm not a stranger." His words surprised him as much as they did her. For a moment, neither knew what to say. The snow outside had stopped completely, leaving only the cold wind moving softly through the air, a reminder that the world still existed beyond those walls. Alessia ran a hand through her hair, trying to hide the faint tremor in her fingers. "Go get some rest, Richie," she said quietly. "The storm will end by morning." "And what happens when the sun rises?" he asked, his voice calm, without irony. "Tomorrow everything goes back to the way it was. Are you sure about that?" She didn't answer. Her steps carried her toward the staircase, slow and uncertain. At the top, she paused and looked back. He was still there, standing before the fire, watching her with the kind of gaze that sees more than it should, a gaze that felt like redemption. And for a brief moment, Alessia realized that the warmth she felt no longer came from the fire. Dawn was just beginning to dissolve the night when a distant sound woke her. The wind had stilled, but the mansion seemed to breathe, heavy, restless, as if it held something unsaid within its walls. Alessia rose and walked downstairs slowly, guided only by instinct, by the quiet pull of something inevitable. The air still smelled of burnt wood, and the fire had faded into a bed of glowing embers. Then she saw him. Enzo stood by the table, his face lit by the soft glow of the candles. The golden box was open. Its lid hung loosely to the side, and in his hand something small gleamed, a pendant shaped like an angel. Alessia froze midway down the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs with the force of a memory she had buried, but never healed. For a second, the scene seemed to suspend in time. "You had no right to touch that," she said, her voice low, hoarse, cold, yet trembling. Enzo turned slowly to face her. His expression was heavy with guilt, but calm, steady. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said softly. "I just needed to understand." He placed the pendant gently on the table. The metal caught the light, glowing with the hue of aged gold. Etched on the back was a single name, Alessia. The sight struck her like a soundless blow. 10 years of walls, of control, of silence, all came crashing down in an instant. She stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the object that once belonged to another lifetime. "Where did you get that?" she asked, breathless. "From my father," he replied. "It was among his things." The silence that followed felt sacred, too fragile to break. The name Richie echoed again inside her, tangled with the memory of another night. Another Christmas Eve drenched in blood and loss. "Your father had no right to that name carved there," she whispered. "Or to that memory." Enzo's eyes stayed on hers, unwavering. "Before he died, he told me the truth," he said. He told me a man was killed because of him, that he sold himself out of fear, and spent the rest of his life trying to fix what he destroyed. Alessia felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. Her hands trembled, but she refused to let him see it. He confessed. The words came out weak, as if borrowed from someone else. Yes, Enzo answered, his voice steady but weighted with grief. He said he never forgot the face of the man who died believing in friendship. Said the betrayal haunted him, even in his dreams. And before he died, he asked me if I ever found someone named Alessia Moretti to give this to her. He looked at the pendant, then back at her. It was his, but it always belonged to you. She took the pendant with trembling fingers. The metal was cold, and the moment it touched her skin, a flash pierced through her mind. Angelo's laughter, the warmth of that last night, the promise he made before everything ended. "I'll come back, Alessia. Even if the world ends, I'll come back." And he had not as a man, but as a memory, carried in a symbol, delivered by a stranger. Tears threatened to rise, but she swallowed them back with the same iron discipline that had kept her alive for 10 years. "Your father destroyed my life," she whispered, her voice trembling with fury and grief. "And now you walk into my house holding a piece of it, thinking you can call this forgiveness?" Enzo didn't answer at first. He only stepped forward, eyes glistening. "I didn't come asking for forgiveness. I came to return what Christmas took from you." The words moved through the air like a prayer, quiet, reverent, unstoppable. Alessia turned away, staring into the fire, her shoulders tense. "You don't understand, Rixie. I've lived a decade with that name echoing in my head. 10 years of ice, of war, of silence. 10 years without believing in anything." Enzo took another step closer. "Then maybe this is the Christmas he wanted to give back to you." She turned to face him fully. "He doesn't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," he said softly. "But you deserve peace." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The fire crackled. The wind brushed softly against the windows. The world seemed to pause, waiting for her answer. Alessia looked down at the pendant in her hands, then back at him. "Do you even know what this means to me?" she asked. "I think I do," he said. "But only you know what it still means to you." Her anger melted into something deeper, something nameless. It wasn't just pain anymore, it was release. Not only loss, but a strange kind of reunion. In that fragile moment, the past stopped being a memory and became something living between them. "My father was the traitor," Enzo said quietly, his voice faltering. "But I don't want that to be the last thing he leaves behind." She drew in a shaky breath, her chest rising unevenly. "Then why come here?" "Because sometimes we have to hand over the guilt before it buries us alive." He stepped closer until the fire's reflection danced in both their eyes. "I can't undo what he did, Alessia, but I can carry what he left unfinished." His words cut through her defenses. Her face hardened, but her eyes betrayed her. There was something in his tone, a kind of truth that carried no weight of manipulation, no expectation, just honesty. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I love that man. His death. It's what made me this." She gestured around her at the cold beauty of her prison. "And you bring me the one thing left of him, thinking it could erase the rest." "I don't want to erase it," he said softly. "I want you to remember without it hurting so much." She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the air thick, the fire distant. "You talk as if you know what it's like to live with a ghost." "I do," he replied. "Mine was called regret." For a long moment, neither moved. The pendant caught the light, glowing like a heart of fire. The engraved name seemed to pulse, alive again. And then, a single tear slipped free. Alessia wiped it quickly, as if hiding the impossible. Enzo said nothing. He simply watched her, not with pity, but with reverence, as if witnessing the quiet rebirth of a soul. That woman, forged in iron and guilt, finally looked human again. And Enzo knew, in that moment, that the true gift wasn't what he carried in his hands, but the forgiveness quietly being born between them. The storm returned without warning, as if the sky, too, had memories it needed to purge. Lightning split the horizon, and each thunderclap echoed through the mansion, shattering the fragile silence that still lingered between them. Alessia still held the pendant tightly, her gaze lost in the flames rising from the fireplace. The firelight shimmered against the tears she refused to let fall. It felt as if the entire universe was breathing in rhythm with her pain. Enzo didn't move. He stood there, giving her space, but every flash of light revealed her face caught between anger and surrender, between the ruins of the past and the faint promise of something new. "Why did you come here, Rixie?" she finally asked, her back still turned. "Do you even know what that name does to me?" Her voice trembled beneath the surface, even though it tried to sound firm. Enzo drew a deep breath before answering. "Because sometimes you have to face what destroys you, to find out what's still worth saving." She turned slowly, her eyes glistening in the light of the fire. "You think there's anything left to save here?" The question hit like a blade, but there was a plea hidden beneath it. Enzo took a cautious step forward. "I didn't come to save you, Alessia," he said. "I came to give you back the right to breathe without guilt." The words faltered in the air, fragile but true. And before she realized it, Alessia stepped closer. The wind slammed against the windows, making the curtains billow like mourning veils. Her pulse raced, not from the storm, but from the way he looked at her, without fear, without agenda, without submission, only truth. And truth had always been what terrified her the most. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "But I am," he answered. "And I'm not leaving. Not while I still believe you secretly do believe in miracles, even if you deny it." A bolt of lightning flooded the room with light. The shadows danced wildly across the walls, and for an instant her face seemed divided, half light, half darkness. "I don't believe in miracles," she whispered. "They died with him." Enzo moved closer, his voice low but steady. Then maybe what he left behind wasn't death. Maybe it was the seed of what still meant to live. She looked at him, no words, just the sound of the storm and the steady beat of something awakening inside her. The air between them seemed to hum. The fire reflected both fear and longing in equal measure. Alessia took a shaky breath, the pendant trembling in her hand. "All Christmas ever gave me was pain," she said softly. "Memories that never asked to come back. And what if Christmas isn't about memory?" Enzo's voice dropped to a whisper. "What if it's time itself trying to give you a second chance?" His words cut deeper than she expected. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. "You talk like you know my soul," she said. "Maybe I just recognize what I carry too." He stepped closer until the firelight wrapped them both in the same glow. "My father destroyed what he loved," Enzo said quietly. "I don't want to repeat that. I want to heal what he broke." The sound of rain grew louder, and the house trembled under a distant thunder. For a fleeting moment, Alessia looked small, diminished beneath the weight of her own past. "You really think you can heal what time has already rotted?" she asked. Enzo stepped closer, his voice gentle but unwavering. "Time only rots what's been forgotten, but what's remembered with love still breathes." Her chest tightened, every part of her reacting to his presence. Anger, fear, something unnamed that had been buried for years. "You make me remember what I spent my life burying," she whispered. "Maybe because what you buried never died." He reached out slowly, as if offering an invisible truce. "And if you let me, I can prove that what's left is still worth living for." A gust of wind slipped through the cracks, extinguishing one of the candles. The fire in the hearth flared higher, painting their faces in shades of gold and ember. The pendant swung gently between her fingers, catching the light like a tiny sun. "He promised me he'd come back," she said, her voice breaking. "And he did," Enzo whispered. "Not in the way you expected, but in the way you needed." Those words stopped time. Alessia drew a shaky breath, and this time a tear fell freely, landing on the pendant. The metal gleamed as if the light itself was breathing with her. "Why are you doing this to me?" she asked, voice trembling. Because I need the same forgiveness you haven't given yet. He wasn't pleading. He was offering. She stepped forward and suddenly, there was no distance left between them. The fire seemed to fuse into one single flame. And if I can't? She asked, her voice almost gone. Then I'll stay, he said softly. Until you can. Thunder rolled again, but now it sounded far away. The world outside was still at war, but inside the mansion, something fragile, something lost, began to awaken. Alessia looked at the fire, then back at him. You're stubborn, Richie. I learned from what love does when it's real. His smile was faint, tender, tired, achingly human. And in that instant, what she felt wasn't weakness. It was surrender. The storm raged outside, but inside her the wind had gone still. For the first time in 10 years, the cold didn't win. And when the lightning lit the room once more, Alessia understood. The real storm had never been outside. It had always been inside her. Morning came softly, breaking the night with thin threads of pale light. The storm had passed, but the mansion still carried the echo of everything that had happened within its walls. The air smelled of smoke and silence. Alessia sat before the fireplace, the pendant resting between her fingers. Her eyes lost in the glowing embers that refused to die, just like her memories. Enzo approached quietly, respecting that sacred space that exists between pain and healing. She didn't hear him come in. Or maybe she did, and chose not to react. The tears she once feared had dried slowly, leaving behind only the weary grace of someone who had spent years at war with herself. You didn't sleep, he said softly. Neither did you, she replied. Their words floated gently, almost casual, but both knew they were speaking of things far greater than rest. The pendant swayed between her fingers, each movement catching a shard of morning light. Do you know what I did that night? Alessia asked, her gaze fixed on the fire. I ordered everything that reminded me of him to be destroyed. They burned the room, the clothes, even the letters. But this pendant, I thought it was gone forever. Now I see that fate was just waiting for the right moment to return it. Enzo lowered himself slowly, kneeling until he was level with her. And that moment is now, he said. Alessia drew a deep breath. I don't know if I deserve this. He shook his head softly. No one deserves forgiveness. It happens only when guilt finally gets tired of screaming. The words hung between them, warm, quiet, almost soothing. She met his eyes, and for the first time in years, she saw something she'd forgotten how to recognize. Peace. Why do you insist so much on me? She asked. Because watching you give up is like watching my father repeat his mistake, only this time, in silence. Alessia lowered her eyes. The name Marco Ricci still weighed heavily, but now it sounded different, no longer like hatred, but the closing note of an old pain. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, Enzo, she said softly. I know, he answered, it's remembering. Without bleeding. She smiled then, small, weary, but genuine. You talk as if love is still worth it. It always is. Even when it hurts. His gaze was steady, and for the first time, hers softened. Between them hung a quiet tenderness, a wordless confession between two broken souls who recognized each other's scars. Alessia lowered her face, her breath mingling with the soft crackle of the fire. I spent 10 years hating the wrong man, she whispered, and 10 more trying not to feel anything at all. But now, I don't know what to do with what's left. Enzo reached out slowly, not touching, just letting his presence speak. Feel it, he said, without fear. What's left is what's keeping you alive. She lifted her eyes and they met in silence. Time seemed to suspend. There were no longer titles or sins between them, no Mafia queen, no traitor son. Only two tired souls realizing that pain, too, is a form of love. Alessia hesitated, then reached out her hand. Enzo took it gently, without rush, as if touching something sacred. The gesture was small, but the world seemed to shift. The fire flared brighter, the air felt lighter, and the mansion, for the first time in years, seemed to breathe again. Alessia closed her eyes, letting a single tear fall, not of pain, but of release. "Maybe this is the Christmas he wanted to give back to me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The Christmas where love returns, but without wounding." Enzo smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "Or maybe it's the Christmas where you finally chose to forgive yourself." A quiet, genuine laugh escaped her lips, a sound like the forgotten note of an old song, and it echoed softly through the room. The morning sun broke through the windows, touching her face with light. It didn't reveal power or fear anymore, only redemption. She moved closer, and the embrace came naturally, unplanned, wordless. A meeting of two fates that had resisted too long. Her head rested against his chest, and the heart that had pretended to be made of stone finally remembered how to beat calmly again. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked. "For giving me back to myself." Time seemed to stop there. The fire, the light, even the wind, everything stood still, as if the world itself was holding its breath to watch. Alessia took a slow breath, her face resting against his shoulder. "Maybe love doesn't save anyone," she whispered. "But it reminds us there's still something worth saving." He smiled, saying nothing. And in that silence, forgiveness finally found what it had always been searching for: a home. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall again, soft, quiet, like blessings descending from the sky. And for the first time in a decade, Alessia Moretti was no longer afraid of Christmas. Morning arrived like a silent promise. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, and the Moretti mansion, once swallowed by shadows, now breathed light for the first time in years. The garden lay beneath a veil of white peace, each flake shimmering with the gold of a new beginning. Alessia stood by the window, watching the world without hurry, as if rediscovering the simple act of existing. Behind her, Enzo walked slowly, the careful steps of someone entering a sacred place. The fire still burned in the hearth, its soft crackle filling the silence. He stopped a few paces behind her, saying nothing. He didn't need to. Between them existed an understanding deeper than words. Alessia's fingers traced the pendant around her neck. Once a curse, now a heartbeat made of gold. "It's time to turn on the lights," she said softly. Enzo smiled, surprised but silent, simply watching as she crossed the room to the mansion's main panel. Her touch on the controls was slow, almost reverent. And then, one by one, the lights came to life. The garden glowed, the stained glass windows shimmered, and the house that had lived in silence for 10 long years began to breathe again. The reflections painted the walls with a warm golden glow. The servants exchanged astonished glances. It was as if the house itself had started dreaming once more. Alessia exhaled deeply, feeling warmth not just from the electricity, but from something awakening inside her, something she could finally call forgiveness. "How long has it been since you did that?" Enzo asked, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. "Since the day he died," she replied. She turned toward him, and for a moment, the morning light softened her face, lighter, alive, almost reborn. "Angela used to say no home should sleep in darkness on Christmas night," she said quietly, "but I let mine sleep for 10 years. I thought that way I could erase the pain." Enzo watched her silently before asking, "And did it work?" "No," she answered. "It only put to sleep what still wanted to live." At the center of the room stood the Christmas tree, the same one that had spent years hidden in the basement. It was simple, almost modest, but the light turned every ornament into a quiet prayer. Alessia walked toward it, the pendant resting in her palm. The golden metal reflected both her face and Enzo's, side by side. "This was the real gift, wasn't it?" she asked softly. "Yes," he replied. "The gift he meant to leave behind. The one only forgiveness could open." She hung the pendant on the highest branch of the tree. The small golden angel swayed gently, catching the light as if blessing the house itself. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Alessia smiled, a small gesture that somehow felt greater than any empire she had ever built. The entire house seemed to watch her, as though it had been waiting for this moment for years. "Do you see this?" she said, gazing out the window. The snow fell softly, delicate as silk, and the sunlight made it shimmer like liquid gold. "Christmas isn't about miracles," she said quietly. "It's about new beginnings." Enzo watched her, unsure whether to answer or simply keep the moment sacred. "And what comes after the beginning?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Living," she said, smiling faintly, "and learning not to run from what hurts." She turned toward him, her eyes warm and tender. "You know, Richie," she said softly, "I thought the gift was this pendant, but it wasn't." "Then what was it?" he asked. Alessia took a deep breath. "It was you. Because through the hands of a stranger, the past gave me back what time had stolen." The silence that followed was light, almost sweet. Enzo lowered his gaze, his heart full. "I don't know what to say." "Don't," she replied gently. "Some stories don't need words, only presence." Then she smiled, the kind of smile that turns tragedy into redemption. The church bells rang in the distance, their sound rippling through the city. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting the room in warm colors. Alessia lifted her face and closed her eyes, as if offering silent thanks. "Merry Christmas, Angelo," she whispered. "And thank you for sending the right gift." Enzo stood quietly, knowing that the woman before him was no longer the same. The cold, unyielding Mafia queen had vanished with the storm. In her place stood a woman who had learned, through loss and longing, that love is the only weapon that heals. Outside, the snow kept falling, wrapping the world in peace. And inside the Moretti mansion, for the first time in a long time, there was warmth enough to soften even destiny itself. Christmas has always been a season of lights, but for Alessia Moretti, it had long been made of shadows. Until one small golden box reminded her of what she'd forgotten, that forgiveness is the one miracle time can never erase. She discovered that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about freeing the heart from the weight that keeps it from loving again. That wounds, when accepted, become bridges. And that even in the silence of the coldest nights, love always finds a way back. This Christmas, may we all learn what Alessia did. There is no power greater than the power to begin again. Because forgiveness is the flame that rekindles the impossible. And you who does your heart need to forgive before the year ends. Share your answer in the comments below and stay with us for more stories of love, faith, and redemption.